Good morning. Welcome to the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee meeting, the 8th one of this year. It's the 15th of September. Before we continue today, I'd just like to wish the councillors good morning and note that the Ipswich community is watching this via live stream. Before we commence this morning's meetings, I'd like to take a moment to explain why we are proceeding with today's committee meeting and to acknowledge the moment in history we find ourselves in. Last Friday, the 9th of September, Australian time, we awoke to the news that Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, had passed away. Her Majesty's reign is unprecedented, not just in our lifetimes, but even amongst the storied histories of the British monarchy. We are proceeding with today's committee meetings following advice from the Department of Local Government that council meetings can proceed during the period of official mourning. While we mourn the passing of our sovereign and hail the reign of King Charles III, the work of government continues and decisions need to be made to progress our city. On that basis, we'll proceed with today's committee meetings as advertised, while acknowledging the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and her dedicated service and compassion for the people of the Commonwealth. Flags at all council properties are at half-mast, and I thank the many community organisations who have flagpoles for flying the Australian national flag at half-mast. Council's placed a condolence book in the foyer of the administration building at 1 Nicholas Street for residents to leave tributes to Her Majesty. Copies of these messages will be retained in Council's library and historic archives, and I'll personally deliver the messages to Her Excellency, the Governor of Queensland, later this month. I'll move formal condolences for Her Majesty on behalf of our community at our ordinary council meeting on the 29th of September, following the National Day of Mourning and Memorial Service due to be held next week. So with that, we'll call attendance, and in attendance this morning we have myself, Councillor Kunzelman, Councillor Milligan, Councillor Fechner, Councillor Doyle, Councillor Tully. As an apology, I note from Councillor Tully that Councillor Jonick, I think, will be here soon.
You're just running a few minutes late.
Just a few minutes late, no problem. And also acknowledge that Councillor Ireland also requested audio link, and this was approved on the 28th of July. May I just confirm, Councillor Ireland, that you're online?
Good morning, Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies from the Deputy Mayor? No? Okay, well, I'll just note that he's not in attendance here. We move on to the acknowledgement of country. And Ipswich City Council respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners as the custodians of the land in which we meet. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, as the keepers of the traditions, cultures and stories of a proud people. We now move on to statement on the passing of Her Majesty. So on behalf of Ipswich City Council and the residents of Ipswich, I wish to acknowledge the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. This loss has been felt deeply across our community. In this period of mourning and reflection, we remember Her Majesty's long life of devoted and dedicated service to the peoples of the Commonwealth. I ask councillors to join me in observing a moment of silence as a remark of respect to Her Majesty. Thank you, councillors. May she rest in peace. I welcome the Deputy Mayor. I'll ask, are there any declarations of interest on the matters on the agenda today? No. In that case, we'll move on to business outstanding. We have two matters that were laid on the table at the last committee meeting. The first is item 1, which is the response to petition, the leash-free dog area, Camira Recreation Park. So I'll move that item be lifted from the table. Do I have a seconder for that, Councillor Tully? Thank you very much. Put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. How do you vote, Councillor Ireland?
I agree.
Thank you very much. That's passed. So that matter is now lifted off the table. Now, this was a report concerning a petition received from the local community requesting alterations to the existing leash-free dog area located at Camira Recreation Park, Camira. Now, I think the Divisional Council from Division 2 raised this. Do you wish to move this, Councillor Tully?
I'd spoken to Councillor Jonick earlier about this. Could this be deferred until later in the meeting, please?
So when
there's just an update we want on the recommendation. I suppose that can...
Okay.
So that case... Is this the same as item 1? is this item 1 listed there? Is that, see, it's listed under business outstanding, it's also listed as item 1. It must be, yeah, like it's been.
Oh, either way, it's the first item,
Yeah,
I guess.
So, well, with the agreement
happy
of the
to-
meeting, if that could be dealt with at the
Okay.
after item 11.
Okay, so councillor, you're moving that we move item 1 to after item 11,
Yes,
after the exercise of
I'll move
delegation report. I'm happy to second that. Any discussion? I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the room. Councillor Ireland, how do you vote?
Affirmative.
Thank you very much. Move on to item 2, which is the Redbank Plains Library additional community meeting space. And it's a response to a notice of motion here. I'll hand over to you, Deputy Mayor. Do you wish to, you moved the original notice of motion. Do you wish to move or speak to this?
It needs to be lifted from the table, ma'am.
My apologies. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. I'll second that. Any discussion? I'll put that to the vote that this item be lifted from the table. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. Councillor Ireland, how do you vote?
Affirmative.
Thank you very much. So this is a response to report. This report is providing a response to a notice of motion moved by the Deputy Mayor at the council meeting on the 19th of May, 2022. Deputy Mayor, will I hand over to you to move or discuss?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move an amendment to that recommendation that the matter be referred to budget workshops for the 23-24 budget build. And another part there that I'll just think of some words on the fly, and that council officers liaise with apprenticeship providers to see if there's possibility for a partnership in delivering those works. And I'll speak to why that second part's in there in a minute.
Okay, so you're looking at that recommendation being that the report, Redbank Plains Library Additional Community Meeting Space, response to notice of motion. Well, I say that's A, be received and context noted, but also B, that it's to be discussed during budget workshops? Or you just...
I think it works as one. I mean, you
or take out the...
whatever people are
context
comfortable with.
It's your amendment. I'll let you...
Yeah, okay, as part B then. Yeah, that's fine.
I was going to recommend part C being the apprenticeships, but if you want to roll that into just part B as well, that's your amendment.
Whatever floats your boat, I believe, is the operative term, Mayor.
Thank you. In that case, I'll do a C, which is, I think was your wording about apprenticeships?
That council officers liaise with apprenticeship providers as to whether we can partner with them to deliver that work.
Thank you. As the chair, I'm happy for that to be put forward. I'm not getting any objections, so you're moving A, B and C.
That's what I've moved, Mayor.
Okay, I'm happy to second that. Do you wish to speak to that or ask any council officers questions?
No questions for officers, just putting forward those additional recommendations today after talking with Councillor Ireland over the phone in the last couple of weeks. According to Councillor Ireland, previously Council would partner with apprenticeship providers so that people can get their experience doing their apprenticeship. I think that's a good thing to do for the young people of Ipswich, even the mature age apprentices. So I'd like to see that occur wherever possible. So that's just a bit of a thought exercise we've been conducting. As for the part B, adding that on so that it goes somewhere. Without part B, it could just float off into the ether, and that's certainly not the intention of Councillor Ireland and I. So that's what I've got there this morning, and that's what I've moved. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ireland, do you wish to speak to this motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with the Deputy Mayor that it would be wonderful to see council partner with some apprenticeship groups to do a build for council space, for council meeting rooms. Redbank Plains as a suburb is the largest suburb in Ipswich, and it's very, very short of council facilities. So we look forward to seeing some more office space provided for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this? I think I know with Division 4 with the Ipswich State High School, there was the traineeship partnership that council did with building the planter boxes that we did earlier this year. If nothing else, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour of A, B and C, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. How do you vote, Councillor Ireland?
Affirmative.
Thank you very much. That's carried. We now go on to the confirmation of minutes for the 11th of August 2022. I move that those minutes be passed. Do I have a seconder for those? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Any discussion on those minutes? I put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. How do you vote, Councillor Ireland?
Affirmative.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We move on to item 4, which is the development application 2295/2020/VA, variation application seeking preliminary approval to vary the planning scheme from rural constrained, Ripley Valley zone and future urban zone at Siddens Road at Dibing Heights. May I ask for the relevant council officer to come to the lectern, please?
Mayor, may I just speak for a moment? I don't know if it's, I need to declare it, but I went to school with a sister of one of the people that owns land on Siddens Road. I don't know if that's I need to declare that.
Are they landowners of this land? But I think
I think so.
Council, as soon as you say this, you have an obligation to do a declarable conflict of interest. Do you have?
Okay. Well, I haven't got anything here in front of me, so
Okay. I guess before I read out
read
anything,
it out, I'll agree with it.
no, it's okay. How would you like to deal with it, Councillor Ireland?
I'd like to be present for the meeting, but I won't vote on it.
And not participate, do you mean? Not present but not participate, or do you tend to participate?
I'd like to participate, but not vote on it, please.
Okay. I think before I move anything, could I get a bit better of an understanding of the nature of the declarable conflict of interest? Do you know the landowners, or how far away would they be impacted by this? And I guess the nature of the relationship?
Well, I believe they live on Siddens Road.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't spoken to them for a long time, but I believe they live on Siddens Road.
Right. Are they the landowners here?
I'm not exactly sure if their land's the land being developed.
And what's the nature of your relationship with them? Are they just acquaintances, or do you know them quite well, or what's?
Oh no, I went to school with their sister, with this owner's, this landowner, his sister.
Okay.
Long time ago.
When was the last time you would have had contact with them?
I said hello to them at a shopping centre probably a year ago.
Okay.
Mayor, could I
Yes.
suggest, having heard that it seems like a remote connection,
I
and then
would
the
agree.
protection of the councillor would be if she attends, participates but doesn't vote. So if you were to move that, I'd second
Well,
that.
I think you've just moved that, I think.
I'll move that.
Yeah. And so Councillor Tully has moved basically what you've asked for, Councillor Ireland, that you're present, can participate but not vote, and the Deputy Mayor has seconded that. Any other questions or discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. Thank you very much for the disclosure, Councillor Ireland.
Thank you.
May I ask for the relevant council officer to come to the lectern, please?
Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. Anthony Bowles, Acting Development Planning Manager.
Yep. Thank you, Mr Bowles. May you please outline to me why council is have advised to not approve this DA?
Fundamentally, there are two components. There's a conflict with the planning scheme in terms of what the zone currently states and what's been asked for. There's also concerns about the impact of the proposal or future proposals under this variation request on the koala habitat that is present on the site. There is a third matter, which is the need for the development, the planning need in respect to the need to provide housing in this location, despite the constraints of the site and the values of the site that it presently has.
Okay. What's the conflict in the planning scheme?
The variation request is essentially, to use old terminology, which is probably a bit easier to understand, is to rezone the site. It's to change it from a rural constrained site to a residential site, suburban residential, allowing up to 20 dwellings per hectare. So the conflict is there in itself, in that the planning scheme has a intended use for the site. There's also an intention to change the zone in the new planning scheme, the draft planning scheme, to a conservation zone, which is contrary to urban development.
So they want to change a conservation zone into housing development?
It isn't conservation yet. It is currently rural constrained, but in the local area frameworks, we're looking to, having considered the constraints of the site, there's further protections required.
Okay.
And a lot of that comes from the koala vegetation present on the site, and which is mapped under the state koala mapping.
Okay. You mentioned the second thing was the impact to koala habitat. And I do notice that there was an attachment there from an expert claiming that there wasn't an impact on the koala habitat. Do you mind taking us through that?
Fundamentally, the proposal will involve clearing of koala habitat. The views of the various experts that have provided advice on the matter deal with I suppose the extent of the impact. The impact is unavoidable, so there will be an impact. What the applicant is proposing in some ways is that the mitigation measures that they propose will deal with that impact. So things like a koala habitat corridor, which essentially, or rather it's a movement corridor, not a habitat corridor, which allows koalas and other animals that might be present on the site to cross the road. The reason we're concerned about that is the length of the corridor, but the fact that the road is still there and that vehicle strike is the main cause of injury to koalas. It's probably worth stating as well that koala habitat is essentially a proxy for all types of other habitat that is important to native fauna. So things like grey-headed flying foxes, powerful owls, all sorts of other animals which aren't particularly necessarily protected on the SCQ regional plan, koala plan, use this habitat as well. It's sort of a catch-all type of habitat because it's useful and provides habitat for all sorts of species. So whilst koala habitat is the focus of the koala plan, it also provides habitat for other species that are important to the Ipswich biosphere.
Okay, thank you. I note in the documentation that no pre-lodgement meeting was held. Do you mind just outlining to the residents of Ipswich what a pre-lodgement meeting is and why council have them? All councils provide pre-lodgement meetings. Ipswich City Council is a bit unique and we provide free pre-lodgement meetings. A pre-lodgement meeting is an opportunity for a property developer or really anyone to approach the town planners to have a conversation about their proposal before making an application and spending quite a lot of time and effort investigating a site, creating plans and carrying out engineering drawings and things like that. It's completely free and it's something we do on a daily basis. We recommend it to anyone who's interested in doing development because it fosters a cooperative communication channel where we can deal with issues up front. And in this case, we would have provided the feedback that we did provide in some of our other correspondence before the application was created. So as I said, we frequently have these meetings and it is a really powerful tool and something that a lot of developers gain a lot of benefit from because you deal with these really big show-stopping issues right from the beginning.
And as I said, Ipswich City Council is one of the few councils that provide this service completely for free. There's no impediment to having this conversation, essentially.
Thank you, Mr Bowles. Are there any other questions? Councillor Tully?
Yeah, just one. Are there any current development or the development of housing rights, even of a limited nature, on this parcel at the moment?
There's two parcels and they're quite distinct. The northern parcel is fairly cleared. There's been a lot of vegetation cleared, and the southern parcel is basically the opposite. It's quite a large amount of vegetation. The northern parcel has a dwelling house on it, and that would probably be the extent of the dwelling entitlements for this land. There may be a dwelling entitlement on the southern portion. It would be necessary to use the exemptions on the SEQ Koala plan to create a housing pad, essentially about 500 square metres you're allowed to clear as exempt development. The issue is you'd have to also obtain access to the site, potentially through an easement through the existing site, the site to the north. So in terms of capacity for housing at the moment, it's quite limited.
So on the northern section, there'd only be capacity for one house?
In the rural constrained zone, there may also be an opportunity for an auxiliary dwelling or dual occupancy.
Yeah.
So
And
again,
then the
still fairly
southern
limited.
one with the appropriate exemptions at one house there as well.
And managing access to the site and services. So potentially, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councillor Tully.
Thank you, Chair. Just asking for your clarity in relation to the SARA response on this application. Noting that you said that it was in the SEQ habitat and they've got no requirements in
That's
their
right.
letter.
Yep, I can answer that question. So the referral triggers for this application were predominantly relating to the highway, the location to the highway. The SEQ Koala plan has split responsibilities for assessing impacts to koala habitat. Areas in the koala priority area, which is a separate overlay, require referral to the state government. Outside the priority area, but still in the habitat area, requires assessment by council. So in this particular instance, the application wasn't required to be referred. Future applications may require it if there is to be proposed clearing of the vegetation. So although this report includes a proposal plan and shows an indicative subdivision layout, that isn't being proposed at this time. Fundamentally, we're changing the colour from green to pink, essentially.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Ma'am,
Yes,
may
Councillor
I
Roberts.
speak?
Yes, please.
Mr Bowles, I went out and had a look at the land from the end of Grampian Drive. I went with Deputy Mayor Madsen, and the stand of trees that runs from the half-acre blocks at the top end of, I would have said closer to Paradise Heights, but I know it's not called that anymore, through to the small lots just on the corner of Grampian Drive and Centenary Highway. That's the same stand of trees that's going to run through to Siddens Road, isn't it? Or is it?
So there is an existing residential subdivision which backs up to this site with a wide vegetation corridor that's currently there, which connects to this existing corridor. It is the same vegetation corridor. What has been proposed, though, is to segment that corridor. It's to provide access to the site. It's necessary to cut that corridor in half, essentially. There are some. It is a bit difficult to explain why the houses adjoining this site or near this site were able to be cleared up to this point. Particularly also when you look not far in the Ripley Valley, you see quite a large amount of vegetation clearing of this similar type of habitat. And the response to that is simply that the Ripley PDA is excluded from the SEQ regional plan and doesn't go through the same level of assessment. And the other side of that is that the SEQ Koala plan identifies areas that are suitable for retention or for rehabilitation. So what the state has essentially done is said, well, we'll contain the residential dwellings in this location and manage the koala habitat as best we can. And the preference is for these other locations where there is suitable land for rehabilitation or existing habitat that will be retained. What we're looking at here is something that is at the edge of the existing koala habitat corridor. It's to the north of it, and certainly just to the north of it is a highway. The issue that we're faced with is the eventual chipping away at all the edges of a koala habitat corridor erodes its capability to function as a corridor. So what in assessing the koala habitat and all the submissions by the applicant, we've determined that it isn't appropriate to have that impact at this portion of the corridor, as it has linkages to properties to the north and continues as a contiguous corridor to the south, even though part of the site is currently cleared. But to get to the question though, it is one large corridor, and the current development that's occurring on the site is basically about as far west as you can go into that corridor without having significant impacts.
So when you say you're going to cut it off, is it an imaginary line or?
It would be a physical. It would be a physical road. So it would be a road on the surface which would impede the ability of a koala to cross from one area of habitat to another without potentially being struck by a vehicle. And the current proposal includes, the indicative layout currently shows approximately 180 lots, but the variation request allows probably another 100 lots because of the density is permitting or is requesting up to 20 dwellings per hectare. So we could be looking at, 600 vehicles odd using that one access point, and that's restricting the movement from the north of the corridor to the south of the corridor.
Just a comment from me, and I've taken on board what you've said, but the area is going to be bounded by the Greyhound Racing Club that's going to start in 2024. It's got Ipswich Boona Road in front of it. It's got koala kangaroo fencing on the Centenary Highway at the back of Siddens Road. It's going to be very hard for the koalas to get there.
Look, I appreciate that comment. I suppose that's the point that's worth making about the chipping away at the edges of a koala corridor eventually reduces its ability to function like one. So this is at the very north of it, and accept that those constraints exist. However, it is also identified in the SEQ koala plan for retention as well as rehabilitation. So we're taking on board that policy, which isn't necessarily directly about retaining the specific koalas that may be there. It's also heavily focused at retaining habitat where it can be saved, which, as I mentioned before, is a little bit hard to fathom when you've got the Ripley Valley right next door with a huge amount of clearing, but that's a conscious decision to have the development occur in one location and the retention occur in another.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? May I ask, Ms. Wells, this land at the moment is a buffer zone. Can you explain why the buffer zone was put in there as part of the planning?
It essentially is a buffer between the existing rural area, which is largely cleared, and the existing residential or future residential communities that will be constructed to the east in the not too distant future. At some point quite a while ago, it was identified that vegetation corridor is significant, and it was retained because there is boundaries on either side, but it does have a strong linkage to the south to a larger area of vegetation. The new subdivisions that we will see to the east will continue that buffer and continue rehabilitation so that the vegetated and also the highly elevated areas are retained. So there's a bit of topography which makes it difficult to develop even if there wasn't vegetation there. So it works together as suitable habitat and also difficult to develop land, joining together into a larger network of habitat.
Thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Bowles? No, thank you, Mr. Bowles.
Thank you.
I'll move that council refuse development application number 2295/2020/CA, being a variation application preliminary approval that includes a variation approval to vary the planning scheme from rural constrained Ripley Valley zone and future urban zone to suburban T3 zone for the reasons as contained in attachment 2 of this report. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. I'll now open it up for discussion. Councillor Tully?
Yeah, I'm supportive of the motion, Mayor. I am concerned with what's occurred today with the advice that they didn't seek to have a preliminary discussion or pre-lodgement meeting. which, as Mr Bowles has said, is free for this council and not in all councils, but it's an opportunity for an applicant or potential developer to find out exactly what the how the application may be considered. But I do note that they failed to do that for reasons which are unknown, but they were pretty quick off the mark in today's Courier Mail to have a rather negative story against the council, which I find inappropriate, when we're discussing the matter today, embrawling us in a situation where they're basically criticising the council, and we haven't made a decision yet. A big feature article in the Courier Mail. I think that's inappropriate for that to happen, although that's their legal right to use the metropolitan media. And over the years, we get lots of applications from lots of people, but I can say with absolute certainty, those who seek pre-lodgement meetings usually find that their plans and ideas for development, either on a single site or a much larger area, can be understood on both sides, and then they proceed accordingly. And I would urge any potential developer in the city of Ipswich to always take advantage of a pre-lodgement meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. Any other discussion? I would agree with you, Councillor Tully. We offer that deliberately as a free service. Obviously, I note that the developers spent considerable money on getting plans, hiring a lobbyist and getting metropolitan media, but they probably could have, saved themselves a lot of time, I think, if they had actually attended a pre-lodgement meeting. I think too, we are the fastest growing city in Queensland. We do have obviously those fast growth areas of Springfield and Ripley. This is set up deliberately as a buffer, and we can see in the future as a conservation area. I just don't want to touch those areas, is my opinion, because of the need that we will have them in the future, because we will have such an urban sprawl that we do need these green spaces for our community and for our wildlife. If there's nothing else, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And it's unanimous in the room, and I note that Councillor Ireland is not voting.
I abstain.
Well, not voted. Thank you. I'll move on to item 5, which is the development application recommendation of temporary accommodation, camping ground and caravan park at 1 Mile Park. And this is a report concerning the application seeking approval for a material change of use for temporary accommodation for a camping ground and caravan park of 46 sites at 84 Chubb Street, 1 Mile. The application requires a review and a determination by this committee in accordance with the framework for development applications, as more than 20 properly made submissions objecting to the proposed development were received. The proposed development has been assessed with regard to the applicable assessment benchmarks, and it was determined that it cannot be supported in accordance with Section 5 of Section 60 of the Planning Act, as the proposal does not advance the purpose of the Planning Act and conflicts with the applicable codes of the planning scheme. May I speak to the relevant council officer on this matter, please?
Good morning, Anthony Bowles, Acting Development Planning Manager.
Thank you, Mr Bowles. This is compelling reading when you look at the flood maps, but can you explain to us why you're recommending that we refuse this?
Thank you for that question. Look, it floods very badly. Unfortunately, the site is heavily affected by the current AFRL, the Adopted Flood Regulation Line. The applicant has made an attempt to mitigate this through a evacuation and a flood management plan. Unfortunately, we're not satisfied with the suggestions to manage the flood impact from that report. The main issue being ability to evacuate the site safely and a location for the occupants to evacuate to. It does rely on council's own evacuation facilities, which isn't really their purpose. It isn't to provide a facility for a particular development. It's something for the city to use. It isn't sensible to plan to use an evacuation centre, really. It's more sensible to plan to avoid these flood impacts from the beginning. So unfortunately, the site has, if you look through the report, there's a bit of a history about the previous applications that we've received. The site was heavily affected by the 2011 flood at the time that they were carrying out a development approval, which put a handbrake on that, unfortunately. And the updated mapping and the TLPI have identified it as heavily affected by flooding and unfortunately unsuitable for occupation by a large number of residents. It increases the risk to those residents.
Thank you, Mr Bowles. Any other questions of Mr Bowles? Thank you, Mr Tully. Councillor Tully, sorry.
I hope that's not some sort of
Sorry.
future prediction. There's two issues as I read it, but both on the land itself and access during a flooding time. Could you just outline the depth? And I see that in the report there's a minimal depth mentioned, but an actual or potential depth of flooding on the access to the site as being very significant.
That's correct. Chubb Street is the identified evacuation route, but it also floods. And it creates essentially a scenario where you're attempting to avoid a hazard by going to a different hazard and struggling to avoid the hazard completely. So yes, there is some concerns about the depth and the ability to passage through that depth of the flooding. So certainly I think at some points it's 1.2 metres. I'll have to just confirm that. The street does have varying depths of flood impact, but at a certain point you're unable to cross it even a four-wheel drive, and it's certainly not something we would recommend with potentially a caravan or all your goods that you might be storing in your caravan or your belongings. It is incompatible with with an evacuation process that people will go through. If their home and all their belongings are in one place that is flood affected, and it's necessary for them to collect those in a rush, essentially, and go through a flood affected evacuation route, we haven't solved the problem effectively.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of Mr Bowles? Councillor Ireland, do you have any questions? Oh, okay.
No, thank you.
Thank
All
you.
good.
Thank you, Councillor. The recommendation that is before us that Council refuse development application number 19904/2021 MCU for the reasons contained in attachment 2 of this report. I will move that. Do I have a seconder for that? Maybe I should let I'll let Councillor Doyle move it and Councillor Fichtner second it. We'll now open up for discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. I just this is a fantastic, this is a good outcome for our local residents who'd been advocating, and expressing their concerns around this development. If it was approved, many residents have advised us, and it is only their opinion, but some historical developments around 1 mile there, they maintain has contributed to flooding of properties. So they were really concerned about this particular development going ahead and what that might mean with regard to flooding. But obviously there was additional concerns around our road infrastructure, taking all that additional traffic. So I think residents are really pleased with this outcome.
Thank you, Councillor Doyle. And Councillor Fichtner.
I speak in favour of the recommendation to refuse this application. For many in our 1 mile community, this is the common sense outcome. Councillor Doyle and I spent many afternoons down there speaking with residents who sought to meet with us over this very contentious application. And it's really pleasing to see that we had 57 properly made applications, and a lot of these were around flooding and amenity. So I think the intensification of residential uses within flood-affected areas is something that this council leaves in the past and moves to protect our residents in the development decisions that we make moving forward. I note here in 1A of the assessment manager's reasons for refusals, it sets out pretty much what we heard from all of our residents down there in 1 mile this whole time, that the proposal represents intensification of residential uses within a flood-affected area on land situated below the adopted flood regulation line, including the development of temporary accommodation uses. And in some instances, we were down there and our residents actually wanted to speak to the applicant to let them know of the dangers of an application like this. So our residents were coming from a very earnest place and didn't want to see any residents put in harm's way. Similarly, 1D says that the proposal has not demonstrated that health and safety of people is maximised, and that's really paramount for us. So I would like to thank all of our residents down in 1 Mile who rallied together, who bothered to put a submission in, a properly made submission in, and those that reached out to the Office of Division 3 over this time. It feels like a protracted process for a lot. We were getting calls up until last week from people who were wondering where this was at because it's been going for a long time, but the council officers have thoroughly assessed this application and we can comfortably refuse it, and it's well supported by our community down there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fechner. I think Councillor Conzelman.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with the proposal. In the context of our listening to her and hearing what residents are saying, I can just hear them in the event of a future flood, and that's not a remote possibility by any means, but I can just hear them saying, why did council allow this to happen? Which is what we're hearing, and I can see that that would be the question that people there would be asking, why did council allow us to be exposed to this?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Conzelman. Councillor Tully.
Just very briefly, and I'm supportive of this motion, and flooding is a vexed issue and it often arises, and it has. You know, we had that meeting at Goodna last night, and there are islands which are in existence that were free from flooding in the last flood, but to create another one certainly raises issues, and I think that's being properly addressed in our new town planning scheme, which is currently before the government. This is an opportunity to make a proper decision, and people often ask, you know, how was this? How did these historic decisions occur? And I raise the issue certainly in the eastern suburbs from Bundamba to Gales. That didn't have any town planning controls until 1967 when an interim development bylaw was brought in. So there are many properties prior to 1967 that were built without town planning approval because there were no town planning controls, surprisingly. So a lot of historic reasons that I've mentioned previously, cities on rivers around the world, including Australia and Ipswich, that's where communities were built. So it's not a matter of you know, this council or any council just ignoring flooding issues. When I was first elected, Ipswich used a Q20 level, which was regarded by previous councils as appropriate. That's gone to closer to a Q100 level. So for those reasons in the report and what's been said by my colleagues, I am not in a position to do anything but support this recommendation.
Thank you. I too will be supporting this recommendation to refuse. I think page 129 of the report is, you know, you see the map there where the entire development is, you know, would be flooded under the adopted flood regulation line. And I see on page 130, 131 some discussion about the fact that the site levels for this development range from 26.4 metres AHD to the centre of 17.2 metres AHD. And yet we know the identified flood height is 25.7 metres AHD. So it's black and white, that it's just a matter of time when it would flood. And it's not just a matter of flooding, it's also access. So we know that the Chubb Street and Munter Place will be, it will flood. So we need to make sure that, that we maintain the safety of our residents. If there's nothing, yes, Councillor.
Chair, like the best of my ability, I never want to be responsible for any life in a floodplain for, you know, if any future flood were to occur, it's not just the impact of the flood and trying to get all your belongings out in a short period of time. It's the trauma that you get long after the event, the flow-on effect from flooding and disasters we've seen last night. and it continues from the children that were there to the adults that were there to protect them. And it's not as simple as having an evacuation plan. It's not black and white. So I support refusing this, and we've got that responsibility now, and I'm proud of us for making that decision if we do so today.
Thank you, Councillor Jonick. If there's nothing else, I'll move the matter to the vote. Those in favour of refusing the application, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. Councillor Ireland, how do you vote?
I agree.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Next item before us is item 6, the regionally significant project proposal, Ipswich Bus Network. Does anyone have any questions of the relevant council officer on this particular one? No? In that case, we have 2 recommendations before us. This is a report concerning the Ipswich Bus Network Expansion Project and the opportunity to declare this as a project of regional significance. And we have recommendation A, which is that council accept the Ipswich Bus Network Expansion Project as regionally significant. And B, that the Ipswich Bus Network Expansion Project be taken to the next Advocacy Steering Group meeting for consideration of the appropriate advocacy effort. So I'll move both of those together. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Fechner. Any discussion on this? Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm supportive of moving forward in this way on this matter. I just wanted to say that I hope the way that we go about it is constructive with the state government. Any conversation I've had with a state MP in Ipswich about the bus services, they want to see expansion as well. So there's a great opportunity for collaboration. I know that previously opinions have been expressed about state services in an oppositional way, and I don't really think that's the way to do business. In regards to the bus network in Ipswich, there's been some challenges for the private operators recently in scale back services. I do think that the state needs to put a lot more effort into regional, some people wouldn't call Ipswich regional. I know that's a matter for political debate, but we're not metropolitan, I think, is the term Councillor Tully would use. So non-metropolitan bus services in southeast Queensland need a bit of work. And because it's related to buses, might as well, while I'm on the soapbox this morning, just say that bus drivers need to be elevated in our discourse around our town. They provide a valuable service. There's a bit of media commentary going on about the turnover of bus drivers. They cop a lot of abuse. In my experience, all the bus drivers I know are really good people, and I'm proud to know them. And I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing more bus services in Ipswich and better outcomes for our bus drivers.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any other discussion?
I also speak in support of these recommendations in front of us this morning. The amount of work that went into preparing the original paper and the passion and enthusiasm showed by Mr. Delio and his team in particular means that we're well placed to use that original report to elevate our advocacy on this particular matter. And I can't wait to meet at our next advocacy meeting, steering group meeting, to discuss our way forward on this. I think putting it on the agenda is very important for a city that has grown so much in the last 10 years, but our bus services, not so much.
Yeah. I agree, Councillor. It's a very compelling report. The numbers don't lie. And I also note too, I think the member for Ipswich also received an election commitment too for a bus study as well. So I'm not sure the status of that, but that's also a good opportunity for us as well. Any other discussion? I'll put recommendation A and B to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the room. Councillor Ireland, how do you vote?
I agree.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We'll move on to a very popular topic, the adoption of the 3-year new curb and channel capital program. And this is a report concerning the 3-year new curb and channel capital program. Council officers have applied the statistical methodology in combination with input from the community and the divisional councillors, so thank you very much for that, to finalise the 3-year curb and channel program. So the recommendation here is that the council adopt the 3-year program for a new curb and channel as specified in the attachment to this report. Would anyone like to ask the relevant council officers any questions? No? In that case, I will move this recommendation. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Tully. I'll open up for discussion. Thanks, Councillor Tully.
Yeah, just briefly, Mayor, before I opened up the attachment to the report, it's always with trepidation to see how your own division fares. And I was extremely pleased, and I'm sure Councillor Johnnick would join that view, that some of these historic areas are now being attended to over the next 2, 3 and 4 years. So it's certainly a great opportunity to bring some of these areas online with curb and channel, and I look forward to the next 2 to 3 years and beyond as we achieve the ultimate target of curbing and channeling all suburban streets in Ipswich.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. Any other discussion? I just note the comment that you made earlier, Councillor Tully. You talked about the fact that there was no sort of town planning controls before 1967, and obviously our older roads. So it's great to see. I think there's 30 projects listed there in our Forward Capital Works program. If there's no other commentary, I'll move that matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. How do you vote, Councillor Ireland?
I agree.
Thank you. That's unanimous and carried. Move on to item 8, which is alternative road surfacing options. This is a report concerning the industry information requested of the Queensland branch of the Australian Flexible Pavement Association of the residential road and resurfacing treatments. This report is developed in continuance of the notice of motion of spray seal maintenance treatment reports. The recommendation is the report on alternative road surfacing options be received and the contents noted. Would anyone like to speak to the relevant council officer on this matter? Yes, may I have the relevant council officer? This was very interesting reading, actually.
Good morning, Brett McGrath, Acting Manager of Asset Services.
Okay, I think Councillor Doyle, you had a question?
Good morning, Brett. I just wanted to clarify, and thank you for the report. It's very comprehensive, and this is an issue that's impacting residents right across the city. The Mayor and all councillors are regularly contacted about our road treatment. So thank you. Just wondering, going forward, what our next step may be if we do look to changing some of our processes and products. I understand that will be operationally huge ramifications, and obviously from a cost perspective. Are you able to? Yeah.
Sure. As an example, we could provide an assessment of providing a more dominant asphalt program in urban areas over sort of the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
And that would sort of give us an indication of the budgetary requirements to support that sort of program. So, and that could be scaled up over sort of 10% each year, just to give an example of what that cost will be. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Kurzman.
Thank you for the report, Mr McGrath, but I'm just wondering how we make that understandable by the residents. To me, it was extremely complex and confusing, and what's our story is my question.
I guess at the moment we just look at the renewal program on a like-for-like basis. So that means that in a lot of the older areas we're just adopting the spray seal because that's what it's recommended to do. So I guess as we mature as a city and become a larger LGA, we need to, I guess, look at moving to a more asphalt dominant renewal program in those urban areas. But the cost with that, we just need to understand what that means to roll that program out. So we can do that assessment as an example and bring it back to council to review that. Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mayor,
Yes, Councillor.
Good morning, Brett. I didn't actually understand all the information that was in the report, but my question is, there was a road surface done in Flinders View that was really bright grey. Does that report also address the colour of the stone that we're going to use?
Yeah, no.
Don't think so.
Okay. Well, that's a shame. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Something we could always look at, Councillor Ireland. Any other questions, Mr McGrath? No, thank you very much, Mr McGrath, for
Thanks.
that very comprehensive, and it was a very interesting read. Thank you. So I move that the report on the alternative road servicing options be received and the contents noted. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Any discussion?
Mayor and Councillor Milligan maybe consider adding to the recommendation, noting Mr McGrath's comments around preparing something for budget considerations. So I might propose that as part of the 23-24 budget meetings.
So we might do the same with A and B, if that's okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Workshops, happy for that.
So I'll just ask, if you're going to speak, you can put your microphone on, if we can. Thank you.
Budget workshops. Oh yeah, great. Yep, that's great.
You happy with that?
Concise.
I'm happy with that, Councillor Milligan. Yep. Okay, so there are two recommendations before us for discussion. Any other discussion on those two matters?
Oh, sorry, mate. Yeah, I'd just like to support Councillor Fechner's proposal there in that, yes, let's get on with the job. Let's not just receive the report, and that'll be fine, and file it on the shelf, move forward and implement it in the next round for budget consideration.
I think it was good to see the different technologies that are out there, and obviously we've got to look at what we can and can't do as a council, what the investment is, and how do we get that best return and how do we make our roads wear better for longer. So it was, yeah, very good.
Just
Yes,
to
Councillor
add,
Joly.
thank you, Mayor. It will be good to reflect on the report, obviously, in our workshops for the next year's budget build, and it's not just it will line up with our asset register and conditions, and then you're looking at the plant and equipment behind what these new technologies and what we need. So it's a really big discussion, I guess, and you've got to start somewhere. So support the amendment. Thanks.
And just one more thing, and at the most basic level, and the reason Councillor Doyle brought this notice of motion was that there is community concern out there that the spray seal simply isn't good enough, and and we have had constant feedback that this is not consistent with what our residents would expect in a growing city. And I guess to recall Mr McGrath's comments around, as our city matures, we need to look at these things. So these very costly things. I mean, noting that the spray seal we get great value out of, which is why I think it's important to talk about it in the context of budget discussions and maybe phasing over time, as Mr McGrath said, out of the spray seal treatments into the asphalt service rather than.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just reiterating, I guess, the comments that we receive as councillors almost every day, and I think possibly what Councillor Ireland was referring to was the spray seal that is a grey in colour, so visually it's very different to the very dark asphalt. And the texture and the amount of loose stones and some damage that residents will argue that causes. So,
Thank you. And Councillor, I'd also like to thank you for, I think you raised this as a notice of motion back in May, so thank you very much for raising that notice of motion and bringing this forward.
thank you, Mayor. And, I did raise the notice of motion, but that's, in conjunction with Councillor Fechner and my fellow councillors, and I know the Office of the Mayor, this is a hot topic when we think about the services we deliver to our ratepayers, roads. is the key service that residents focus on. So hopefully we will get some good outcomes for residents with some future planning.
Thank you. There's another discussion. I'll put A and B to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. Councillor Ireland, how do you vote?
I agree.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. I note that it's 10 o'clock, so I'd like to move for a 30-minute adjournment. Those in favour, please raise your hand. So myself, Councillor Cosmo, Councillor Milligan, Councillor Jill, Councillor Tully, Councillor Johnick, and Councillor Madsen agree. Those Beckner and Councillor Ireland, how do you vote?
I agree.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have a 30-minute adjournment, come back at 10:30. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome back to the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee of the 15th of September. It's 10:30. We've just had a 30-minute adjournment. And just to confirm, Councillor Ireland, that you are still online?
Thank you, Mayor.
Wonderful, thank you. And we move on to next item, which is item 9, the Infrastructure Environment Department Capital Delivery Report of July 2022. Does anyone have any questions of the relevant council officers in this report? No? I will move this report. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Doyle. Any discussion? I guess my only discussion is to thank Infrastructure Environment Department. I think that the report is outstanding. I particularly like the fact that there's photos there. It shows the progress, and I think it's. I certainly enjoy reading this each month, but I think residents do as well. So thank you very much for that comprehensive report and the scheduling in there as well. So I'll put the recommendation that the report be received and the contents noted to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. How do you vote, Councillor Ireland?
Affirmative.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. Move on to item 10, which is the Planning and Environment Court Action Status Report. May I ask for the relevant council officer to come to the lectern, please?
Good morning, Mayor and Councillors. Anthony Bowles, Acting Development Planning Manager.
Yeah, Mr. Wells, my questions are regarding the landfill the matter before the Planning Environment Court that ended in August last year. How is that proceeding?
Unfortunately, we have not received a judgment at this point, so we are still awaiting that. However, before the next committee meeting, there will be the hearing for the judicial review matters, which is over 3 days in the end of September. What page is that? That's on page 2, so 28th to the 30th. That will be very interesting. I'll be attending the court to observe that. That will not be necessarily dealing with it in the matter of the other appeals as a merits-based appeal. It's about the decision to call in the application, but it will still be very interesting.
And also there's a number of other applicants who've initiated that.
That's correct, yes, including some of the residents.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions of Mr. Bowles? Thank you, Councillor Tully.
Just one here. It's the RJ Lang nominees against Ipswich City Council at Briggs Road at Flinders View. That's been in for, the appeal's been in for a year and a half. And it was specified here that it was going to have a review yesterday. Is there any update on that, please?
Yep. Following that review, we'll be having a without prejudice meeting in front of the registrar on the 26th of September. So we're continuing negotiations, essentially, with the assistance of the court.
Are you confident that might be resolved in that manner?
We are heading. The conversations are being effective. We are gathering more information to support both sides of the negotiation. It may not be resolved in that particular meeting, but we are heading forward, absolutely heading forward, and both parties are willingly negotiating in good faith.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Bowles? No, thank you very much, Mr. Bowles.
Thank you.
I'll move that the report be received and the contents noted. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Milligan. Any discussion on the report? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chambers. How do you vote, Councillor Ireland?
Affirmative.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. On item 11, which is the exercise of delegation report. Would anyone like to ask the relevant council officer any questions on this? No, in that case, I move that the report be received and the contents noted. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Tully. Any discussion? No, I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. I think it's unanimous in the chambers. Councillor Ireland, how do you vote?
I agree.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. We'll now move on to item 1. We'll go through. Which is the response to petition the leash-free dog area, Kimura Recreation Park. And I note that there is the paper, but there's also some supplementary information I think came through with some maps as well. So I'm just double checking here. One's dated the 6th of September, one's dated the 12th of September. It's the 12th of September that we're looking at.
Yes, so the one in the original paperwork is the original recommendations, and then the late report includes
In that
some
case,
mapping to be considered.
I'll just double check with the CEO for my moment. Okay, so I'm looking at the report from the 6th of September, which has recommendations A, B and C. And I'm taking it that the supplementary information that's been sent out with another recommendation would be D. Is that how you'd like that managed? Looking at Division 2.
Hang on 1 second.
That attachment 1 be tabled as supporting information?
Yeah, that can be tabled as D, supporting information.
Yeah, but you've got some amendments.
And I've got some amendments to A.
Okay. So in that case, to get things going, I guess, I'll move recommendations A, B and C of the report that came out on the 6th of September. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Johnnick? Yes. Now, would you
And
like
I would
to move
just
some
like to, if I can amend recommendation A to read that the leash-free dog area within the Camira Recreational Park's current configuration is temporarily altered in line with the proposal outlined in option 1, separating the existing LFDA in the report attached to this item for the safety of the small dogs.
Thank you. Are there any other amendments you'd like to make to A, B or C? Councillor John?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I've got a...
So I'll just deal with that one first. So I'm happy as the mover, I guess as a seconder, for A to change.
Yep.
Yes, Councillor Tully?
It's just a small one in paragraph B.
Yes.
Just to widen it to delete the words recreation park and insert the word area. So to read just Camira area. If I can just explain very briefly without debating that issue, that we have talked about the need for a wider sort of a survey rather than just this park in that Camira area. Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy with that change. Are you okay with that,
Yes.
Councillor Johnnick? Okay. So we have 3 recommendations before us that have been moved and seconded. Would one of the Division 2 councillors like to speak to it?
Certainly. So obviously this is a community concern, and we've received a petition for this as well. There has been fatalities at this park, small dog fatalities, and there's been a number of attacks. It is a well-used local park, so a lot of local foot traffic from the surrounding community use it. It's a very social park for that. So there's regular meetups, and I want it to be continued to be activated, but I wanted to maintain the safety of the small animals whilst we do go out and engage with the community, because there is a number of other facilities currently at the park as well, and it's quite confined. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Thank you, Councillor
Just
Tully.
very briefly, Mayor, yeah, this is a small community park. It's away from the main road through Camira, Old Logan Road, but it does fulfil a purpose. And even though there are general requirements for the establishment of new off-leash dog parks of 2,500 square metres, the amount of usage which this gets at a local level would facilitate a small area to the northeast of the existing facility, which could be done very easily rather than establishing an off-leash area separately for small dogs. So if this is agreed to, it'll be a good outcome for the local community and the people who use that as a social networking opportunity, not just for their dogs but for themselves in that section of Camira.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. Councillor Johnny?
And for completeness, we should add in item D to table that supporting documentation of the mapping in the late item.
Okay.
So just recommendation D would be on that late item, Vicky, but that attachment 1 be tabled as supporting information for item 1 of the Growth, Infrastructure and Waste Committee of the 15th of September 2022, titled Response to Petition Leash-Free Dog Area, Camira Recreational Park.
Okay. May I just check with the committee secretary, was that supporting information loaded onto the website? Info counts it was, so it's available to the public now? Great, okay. Okay, so you're moving that for D, that attachment 1 be, attachment 1 to the document dated the 12th of September? Because there's already an attachment 1 in
Attachment.
the 6th of September.
Yes.
Attachment 1 table to supporting information, okay, yes, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So we have before us 4 recommendations. I propose that we move. They've been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? No, I think it's a really good compromise that we can enact very quickly now and then look further to the future. So I think it's a good compromise. Thank you. I'll put the matter to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous in the chamber. Councillor Ireland, how do you vote?
I agree.
Thank you. It's unanimous and carried. I now open up to see if there are any notices of motion. Councillor Doyle.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to give formal notice of my intention to submit a notice of motion at the next council ordinary meeting. This notice of motion relates to an updated heritage study to assist and inform our new planning scheme. Noting Ipswich City Council has submitted a first draft of the new planning scheme to the state for consideration and review. My notice of motion will request an information report from council officers giving consideration to and advice on the type of heritage study that needs to be undertaken to inform our new planning scheme, noting the previous heritage study that we used to inform the current planning scheme took place in the 90s, I believe. As we're all aware, this council is currently drafting a new planning scheme. This is one of the most significant and enduring pieces of work undertaken by any local government, and one which will directly affect our residents, property owners and business owners over the coming decades. It's crucial that we get this right, and I know our skilled and committed council planning and heritage officers are putting in enormous effort to do just that. The new planning scheme will of course impact the built heritage of our city, which is extremely important to this council and many Ipswich residents. We have so much heritage to be proud of and so much heritage to protect, but we also only have a finite amount of resources. However, over the last 2 years, through conversations with residents and property owners, with council officers deeply involved in drafting the new planning scheme, and through my membership of the Queensland Heritage Council, I've become increasingly concerned about the potential gaps and blind spots in our understanding of our city's heritage. Most recently, the predicament of Carroll House at Goodna came to light. Councillor Tully has gone on the record in local media as being incensed by our decision at the last ordinary council meeting in relation to Carroll House at Goodna, and also on the record that many are shaking their head in disbelief about this decision. Councillor Tully, I shake my head in disbelief every day that we have the oldest and arguably the most inadequate planning scheme in Queensland that provides inadequate protection for our heritage.
Point of order, Mayor. A notice of motion is just that. It's tabled, it's not debated. I don't believe there's a motion before the council at the moment, and I was going to raise that at the start.
Okay.
It's not an opportunity to debate an issue that's coming up
Okay, thank you.
further on.
Thank you, Councillor Tully.
I'm not debating an issue, Mayor. I'm setting out my notice of motion, and I know Councillor Tully is usually requesting, a little bit of creative freedom when he's speaking.
I like to run
I'd
things.
ask for the same, thank you.
Thank you. I usually like to run things a little bit informally, so if you could like to complete your intention of a notice of motion.
Mayor, could I just understand on my point of order whether or not all of this wording is part of the motion?
Yes, it is.
So everything you're reading is going to be in the motion?
Mayor, it's my understanding from meeting procedures I don't believe I need to address Councillor Tully.
Okay, thank you. You know, I'd like to give everyone a bit of latitude, but if you could like to finish your reading out the notice of motion that you intend to submit at the next ordinary, Councillor Doyle.
I think I have one sentence left.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Doyle.
My question is, why wasn't Carroll House afforded greater protection under the existing planning scheme at any point over the last 20 years plus, using mechanisms such as a temporary local planning instrument, planning scheme amendment, or a Queensland Heritage Council application for the property to be entered into the State Register? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much for that notice of motion. Are there any other notices of motion to come to a future meeting?
Mayor, could I just make a very brief response to that? Officers had indicated to me that the protection there would enable the home to be protected there. It was never raised by officers that there was a deficiency or a defect in the planning scheme that would enable it to be moved.
Sorry,
to
I'll
Rosewood.
also say, Councillor Todd, this is a time for notices of motion, so
I
I'll have
understand
to.
that, but
we'll be having a meeting in 2 weeks' time, so I'll now move to matters arising. If there's no matters arising, in closing, I just want to, while we had our meeting, the Queensland Police Service had their annual Ipswich District Medal presentation on at 9 o'clock. Unfortunately, we weren't able to go, but I want to congratulate all of those police that serve our community so well on their presentation of their National Police Service Medals, their National Medal and Class, the Queensland Police Service Medals and Class, as well as the Ipswich District Officer Awards and Special Awards. I want to congratulate every single police officer for those who've received those awards today. And at that, I will close the meeting at 10:47. Thank you very much. And the next one's at 10:57.